Following the events of Avengers Endgame, Spider-Man Far From Home sees Peter Parker returning to his old life after what is being called the blip. He goes on a class field trip / vacation to Europe, along with his best friend Ned and the girl he's crushing on, MJ. His plans to take a break from hero work are quickly thrown out when elemental beings begin causing destruction. Now, Peter is forced to team up with a new hero named Mysterio to take down the colossal threats, while also balancing his relationships with his friends. Far From Home arrives at an awkward time for the MCU. Endgame just plunged us deep into a dour world where depression and grief were in the forefront, and the film concluded with a bittersweet send-off to some fan-favorite characters. Following this up roughly 2 months later with a lighthearted teenage comedy is a distasteful misstep that undoes some of the resonance Endgame left behind, very similar to what Ant-Man and the Wasp did to Infinity War. Additionally, making it the final chapter in Phase 3 is incredibly misguided. I'm not a fan of Marvel's new pattern of finishing their phases with a dainty comedy coming off the heels of an affecting entry to soften the blow. Why soften it? Give your films time to breathe and allow their impact to stick with the audience. It's funny because this movie would have actually served much better as the start of Phase 4 because it deals with the consequences of this changed world and begins setting up a new storyline across the franchise. But that's enough of that. Let's get into the film itself. At their core, the Spider-Man comics portray the immense difficulty of balancing regular life with hero life through the eyes of a teenager. In this respect, Far From Home is faithful to the spirit of the source material. Peter is trying to profess his feelings to MJ throughout the film, but his duty as Spider-Man always pulls him away at the most inopportune moments. These instances are often played for laughs, but also carry with them a cursed air where it seems like Peter can never reach his finish line. He wants to take a break from heroism by going on vacation, but the presence of the villains interrupts his plans. He wants to spend time with MJ, but frequently has to disappear without an explanation, thus straining their friendship and allowing a rival admirer to make his move. This downtrodden approach to Peter, where it seems like fate will never align for him, is part of what makes Spider-Man so appealing, and it works well in this movie. Another aspect that makes Spider-Man appealing in this picture is Tom Holland, who has completely devoted himself to this character. His gleeful nature suits the young web-slinger spectacularly, and he's granted some emotional range to play around with, which allows us to see different sides of Peter for this go-around. One thing I absolutely love about this film is its setting. New York has been and always will be Spider-Man's home, and part of his iconography. But after 7 Spider-Man movies set in that city, not to mention the astonishing amount of MCU flicks that also feature the Big Apple, Far From Home offers a much-needed breath of fresh air with its European backdrop. Ironically, as I say this, one of the best moments in the picture is when Peter is swinging around his hometown with a carefree, enthusiastic attitude, so you still get a pinch of New York, but the foreign locales really do go a long way. That's enough about Spider-Man. Let's talk about Mysterio. Can we just take a moment to acknowledge the fact that Fishbowl Head Guy is a main character in a theatrically released Spider-Man movie? How far we've come. Anyway, Mysterio transitions from page to screen wonderfully, with a splendid costume, solid backstory, and superb performance from Jake Gyllenhaal, whose involvement in a Spider-Man project has been tentative for well over a decade. Gyllenhaal is a scene stealer as Quentin Beck, Mysterio's true identity, and is tasked with giving a progressive performance. You see, Mysterio evolves throughout the film, and Gyllenhaal provides appropriate portrayals for each stage of the character. He's subtle and restrained for the first half, but explodes and comes alive for the second. Definitely one of the better parts of the movie. With all that said, I'm still somewhat disappointed with the direction the character was taken. I was hoping that this movie would opt for a more original and surprising route, but Mysterio was instead handled in a functional yet expected manner. If you're familiar with the comic books, you'll know what to look out for. Moving on to the rest of the cast, Samuel L. Jackson returns as Nick Fury, who is mostly a pleasure to see, barring a few strange changes. Jacob Batalon's Ned is nowhere near as annoying as he was in Spider-Man Homecoming. MJ has a much more prominent role this time around, allowing for Zendaya to turn out a quality performance. Jon Favreau, Marissa Tomei, and Angourie Rice have more to do and shine respectively. Tony Revolori is fine as Flash Thompson, but the character is horribly written. And Martin Starr and J.B. Smoove do their best to make their material work, but it just doesn't. This brings me to my next point, the comedy. The MCU Spider-Man movies have created their own distinct humor within the franchise's already established style. I suppose this is because the majority of the characters are still in high school and the movie wants to achieve a teen comedy vibe, which is fine, but these jokes really don't match my tastes. The humor mainly consists of awkward situations, misunderstandings, awkward situations, goofy adult characters, and awkward situations. Seriously, there's little variety in the types of jokes told, with the possible exception of Mysterio. Don't get me wrong, there are definitely some great bits, like when Peter and Nick Fury's conversation keeps getting interrupted, people returning from the snap 5 years later, and the allergy on the plane ride. But jokes like Ned's bachelor plan, it's witches, and the Peter tingle really don't do it for me and come across as terribly forced. If you enjoyed the humor from Homecoming though, then you'll probably laugh plenty in this film. The plot is rather straightforward and not very ambitious. The movie tells its story sufficiently, but not without its problems. Part of the villain's plot is honestly pretty asinine and only works thanks to some major plot conveniences. Peter hits his low point for about 15 minutes before fully recovering and ready to face the dangerous elementals. And for a film that claims to be tackling the consequences of a world after Endgame, there's very little sentimentality to be found. There are a few emotional beats about Peter grieving over Tony, but most of them feel hollow or surface level. However, I do appreciate the low-level stakes that juxtapose the 1-2 punch of the Thanos pictures, and the movie does provide some awesome scenes. The climactic battle perfectly complements the scale and struggle of Peter's story. There's a brilliant sequence where Peter experiences a nightmare-like hallucination, and the filmmakers clearly had a blast making it. And the running theme, which I can't get into specifically, is quite fitting for the Spider-Man character. It relates to deception and the importance of the truth, which is integral to Peter's internal conflict about hiding his identity. As for the two post-credits scenes, there's definitely a lot to discuss. The mid-credits scene is amazing, among the best of the series. It concludes the film with a jaw-dropping cliffhanger that resembles the end of a comic book, prompting the viewer to find out what happens in the next issue. It also features a god-tier character introduction that had the theater roaring with exuberance. The post-credits scene is interesting in a broader sense, but dull in execution. It sets the stage for the next phase, and we'll just have to see where Marvel goes from here. Far From Home tries to be a hilarious and charming teen comedy and simultaneously an exciting and thrilling superhero flick. The result is an adequate mixture of the two. It gets the job done nicely, but not much more than that, I'm afraid. I do think it's better than its predecessor, though that's not saying much as I'm not the biggest fan of Homecoming in the first place. Perhaps if Endgame had been given a year to itself and this movie released next summer, it would have sat better with me. But as it stands now, this 23rd installment runs strongly with the middle of the pack. I give Spider-Man Far From Home... No, I can't do this. Can we get another poster? No. Definitely not. Jeez, what is with the Spider-Man marketing team? They didn't learn their lesson with Homecoming? You'd think there'd be one good poster. That's it. Fan art it is. Let's see... Perfect. There we go. I give Spider-Man Far From Home a B. So those are my thoughts on the movie. Not the best Spider-Man film, but certainly not the worst. But what did you think? Did you enjoy this lighthearted palate cleanser? How does it stack up against the library of Spider-Man movies? Be sure to let me know in the comments section. And if you like this video, then please consider giving it a thumbs up and subscribing to my channel for similar content, as that would really help me out. See you in the next video.